Hello everyone, welcome today to today's webinar. Really glad you could come and join us. And today we are building Logic Apps live. I mean, whoever knew that building Logic Apps could be a spectator sport? But here we are. So welcome aboard, and we'll take it away and show you the amazing world of deving Logic Apps. So basically, we assume you're familiar with BizTalk, interest in AIS. You don't need any more. You don't need anything other than to be interested in AIS and integration on the Azure platform. And really, our agenda is one thing. We're just going to dive in from an absolute clean slate, absolutely nothing on there, and we'll build something. Your presenters, as per the rest of the series, I'm Andrew Rivers. I'm Director of 345 Technology, and we do integration, data platforms, and data analytics. And I'm joined with Dan Probert, CTO of Affinis. Dan is the world expert on Logic Apps. If there was ever someone who would be the Kung Fu master of Logic Apps, that is Dan. So welcome aboard, Dan.
Oh. Thanks, Andrew. That always makes me laugh.
And we're joined. And this series is brought to you by Azure Integration Group. So Azure Integration Group is like a community initiative to share information and best practices on Microsoft integration, and in particular BizTalk to AIS migration. So the reason, and so where we are in this webinar is that we are, if you were to say, okay, maybe I need to get rid of my BizTalk app and I'm going to put it on Azure, one of the things that the technology you'd be looking at as a first port of call would be Logic Apps, and so that's why we are here. And so in terms of the wider thing of Azure Integration Group, we support technical teams who work for companies that have BizTalk, and we support consultancies that work with BizTalk customers. So we're here to help. Always happy to share information. So anytime you want to get in touch with us, just drop us a line, and more than happy to answer your questions. The other thing is that let us do the research. I mean, a lot of this was being triggered by the fact that Microsoft have announced a BizTalk migrator tool that's coming later in the year, and that will do something to help you migrate from BizTalk to Azure. We don't know exactly what the output's going to look like yet, but we're keeping a close eye on that. So if you'd like us to send you any info, or as soon as it becomes available, then get in touch. So that is the intro, because I want to get over that as quickly as possible so that we can get onto the real meat of the presentation. So one of the things we did last week, we looked at some examples of like a BizTalk app that might be a file receive, possibly a flat file decode, and then that will publish into a message box, and then you'd have a send port that subscribes to that, possibly sends that back to a file. So that's your BizTalk 101. Here's a simple messaging app in BizTalk, and what we're going to look at today is how that app can be translated into Logic Apps. So in the last webinar, we also showed this slide, which is the Logic App equivalent of that BizTalk application. So maybe this is where Dan, if you want to sort of start talking us through, do you want to start talking us through this application and what we're going to build today, and then we'll flip over onto your desktop, and then we'll start building. Sorry, you're muted, Dan.
No problems at all. Yes, I was indeed on mute. That's the first time I've done this in this series.
Yay!
I'm busy doing something else. It always catches everyone out. If it can catch out Jeff Bezos of Amazon, it can catch me out. Yes, so we're going to be creating Logic Apps on the fly today, so expect this to be interesting as we hit various issues and things like that. I purposely haven't run through all this. I'm going to be doing it with you at the same time, because if I hit an issue, then everyone else is likely to hit an issue, and we want to see what they are.
And what would the idea today, like, what would this be like without some danger?
Well, exactly. The demo gods must be smiling on us, hopefully, but let's see how we get on. What could go wrong? So I think today we're going to be looking at picking up a file from on-prem. We're going to start off with a simple XML file we're going to pick up, and we're going to start off by just writing it back out again. So we're going to pick it up, and then we're going to write it back out again to a different folder. And we'll start with that, really simple. Then we're going to introduce an XML transform. So we're going to transform the picked up XML file from one format into another, and then we're going to write that transform file back out. Then we're going to add the XML validator action into it. And then we're going to start talking about design of logic apps and testing in particular, as to, you know, some good thoughts about, at least for us, when we've been doing logic app design and the like with our clients, what we sort of suggest to people in terms of how you design your logic apps. But continuing the sort of BizTalk migration or BizTalk, you know, type of application trend, what we're going to do is then go to what we have you see here, where we're going to pick up a flat file in CSV format. We're going to decode that into XML. We're going to transform it, and then we will publish that to a Service Bus topic. And then we're going to attempt to have a Service Bus subscriber that's going to pick that up. And it's going to probably not transform again, because I've only got one transform. But we will then attempt to flat file encode that and write that back out through a file. I can't guarantee this is all going to work in the hour we've got, but we're going to give it a go and see how far we get. It's not a particularly complex thing to do. If you're already a logic apps developer and you have done a lot of these things, you'd be like, no, there's nothing difficult in this. But what we're trying to do here is not show how you do it, although that's useful to people that haven't used logic apps. We're just talking about some of the issues you hit and where things differ from how you might do it in BizTalk. That's really what we want to get to with this.
Yeah, that sounds great, Dan. So, well, should we crack on then and see where we get to?
Indeed. Okay, let me try and share my screen. Righty. So, can you see that?
Yep.
Brilliant. Okay, so I'm in a brand new subscription here, and there's nothing here purposely, because what we're going to attempt to do here is create things as if I had never done anything before. Now, that also means I haven't enabled various Azure resources either. So one of the things you're going to discover is that probably certain things are not enabled, certain resource providers in the subscription are not enabled either. So I've done this purposely because I want to hit these issues that other people might hit and show how you work past them.
Yeah, so just to confirm, this is like a completely clean Azure subscription. It's got nothing in it. We're literally building from the ground up. There's no kind of, here's one I made earlier. This is a completely bare subscription.
Yes, so this will either work or it won't. Righty, so we're going to start off with some resource groups. So there aren't any resource groups in here, obviously. And in fact, I've never been into this section before, which is why it's popping up little wizards and things like that. I don't know how clear this is to view at the moment in terms of sizing, but everything in Azure needs to be inside a resource group. So I am going to create a new resource group, and I will call it, what should we call it, Andrew? What do you reckon?
Logic Apps Live.
Logic Apps Live, okay. Now, here's something interesting. What should we call it according to naming conventions? Because, believe it or not, there are naming conventions for these things published by Microsoft. The, oh gosh, I want to call it the Cloud Adoption Framework. CAF has some naming standards. It's a document on Microsoft's website. We can put a link up to it. And they have recommendations, including things like you prefix it with what the thing is. So in this case, this would be a logic app, so you might put logic, and then you put a dash, and then you might have the name, in which case it's all lowercase. And then certain resources will have either something indicating the region it's created in, so this is East US, and they might also have something indicating whether it's a dev or a prod version. So this might be dev because we're creating a dev version of it. The reason you do this is that some, and you'll see this later when we go to create a Service Bus namespace, certain resources in Azure need to be globally unique. So if I create a Service Bus namespace called, Dan's favorite namespace, it's the only one in the world that's allowed across all the Azure regions. Yeah, no one else can create it. So you've got to think carefully about how you name things for those resources that need to be globally unique. Not everything is globally unique. Most things are just unique within the resource group, like a logic app. But if you set up a standard set of naming conventions and you follow them for all your resources, it means that you'll get into less trouble later on. But also means when you, if you want to create these resources or script them, you've got a standard pattern to follow, so you can immediately see if one of the names is slightly out. But I'm just going to use this. So this is in this case here, obviously this is a resource group, so I wouldn't put logic at the beginning, it would be RG. And I'm creating it in East US because that happens to be the default for this subscription. And we go, and now in a second, we have a new resource group. Cool.
So Dan, I've just got a request if you can zoom in a little bit, make the text a bit bigger.
Yes, of course.
Is that possible?
I can do that. Yep. Let's try that. How's that looking? So, how's that look? A little bit better there. I have zoomed in a little bit. I've got to be careful here about zooming in too much, because then when I'm actually designing the logic apps, you won't be able to see everything. So now I have a new resource group. I'm going to add a new logic app to it. And I can just start from here by going add and typing in logic app. It's going to give me the option to select a logic app, and I'll go create. And in this case here, we will call this logic app logic. It's going to be, well, what are we doing here? Receive file. So we'll call it receive file. And then again, that's in East US. And it's in.
So it's one of the curious things about resource groups is that your resources in your resource group could be in one Azure region, but resources could actually be somewhere else.
That's exactly right. So when you create a resource group, the resource group is a container. So it's a billing container, if you like, or a billing and security container, really. So because you can apply security, role-based access control to your resource group, and that applies by default to everything within it. So I can create a resource group in any region, but the resources in that resource group don't need to be in the same region. So the location of my logic app here is East US, but the resource group could be in West US or wherever. The location for the resource group is just where the metadata for the resource group is held. But convention normally is that you store all the items in your resource group in the same location as the resource group. Generally, there are exceptions.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, there may exceptions to that if you're doing DR or something like that. But all right, so now we've created a new logic app, and we can go to our resource. And the first time you go to a logic app, it's going to pop up with the logic apps. What do you want to create? And it gives you a whole lot of options here by default for templates. Then they have a whole lot of pre-built logic apps, and then blank. I'm just going to start with blank because what we're doing here isn't included in any one of these. We're wanting to pick up a file from on-prem. So we'll go blank logic app, and now we have our blank logic app, and there's nothing in it. Now, what we're going to be using here is the file system trigger. Logic apps always start with a trigger. In this case here, we want to search for the file system trigger.
So the thing is, there are triggers and actions, and obviously a trigger is a special type of action. But there are tons of them. How easy is it to actually, to what extent do you need to know what you're looking for before you start? Because you've just done a search for that because you know it's there.
I happen to know if you search for file system, you find it. If you search for file, you don't, which is really annoying. Generally, you need to know what you're looking for. There are 300 connectors. So a connector is basically a way of connecting to an external system. So you have a connector for Salesforce, a connector for file system, a connector for SAP, things like that. And a connector could offer a trigger, which means you can use it to initiate a logic app or start a logic app, or it might just be something you're using as an action to write out to that connector. Most connectors have triggers. So because there's so many of them, and every connector has a number of other triggers here or actions that you can also use as well, you kind of do need to know what you're looking for in advance. Generally, the search is quite good. If you start typing something, it will narrow it down. But yes, the first time you go to do something, you can't find it. It's a bit frustrating.
Okay, so we've got a file system one anyway. So,
yeah, we've got file system.
so we
And you can see here that the trigger here is either when a file is added or modified or when a file is created. And the difference between these two is this is looking for a brand new file only. Okay, so if you modify the file, this won't run. Yeah, this one is looking for a file being created or changed. So it looks at existing files you've already picked up and checks their dates. And what's going on in the background with this is that it's maintaining a list of well, it's maintaining the date time that it last checked or that a file was last changed. So if you copy a file in that you've already processed without the date, it will ignore it. Whereas this one is looking for brand new files. Yeah, I generally tend to go for this one. Okay, so I'm going to select that, and we are going to the first thing that happens with the Logic app is it needs to create an API connection in the background. So because the idea is that a Logic app is a reusable piece of code, and you don't want to put your connection specific parameters like your username and password or the server you're connecting to, you don't want to put those in the Logic app because you might change those out depending on whether you're in dev or prod or UAT or integration or whatever your different environment is. So all those settings that could change pushed out to an API connection. And the first time you add a connector in that needs that sort of information, it's going to prompt you to create this API connection. If you already have one, it will pop up and select that already, and then you can choose to create a new one or not. There's a good list of all the 300 plus connectors that we'll publish in a second because somebody's just asked a question or published an answer with that in. Thanks, Paul. So in this case here, I don't have an existing API connection, so it's asking me for a name of an API connection. So I might call that, again, this is a naming convention. It doesn't really matter what I call it, but if I want to follow my naming convention, I might call it, you know, API connection dash, in this case here, it'll be, you know, Dan file, for want of anything else, and then it'll just be dev. There's no region for it. And then the root folder here is going to be the root folder we use for this API connection, which means any Logic app that uses relative paths. So if I went /temp, it would append that to the end of whatever the root folder is. You don't have to use what's inside this root folder. This is only for relative paths. So, you know, I might say, well, I'm going to go to ctemp, you know, to start with. That's where I'm going to start with. Authentication type, well, we only have Windows as a file system. And then now it's going to want the credentials for connecting to our system. And that is going to be the credentials for the system that I'm connecting to. Now, I'm going to jump down here because you'll see something down here. It says connection gateway. What's that? Oh, there's nothing on there. So this is what's known as the this is a piece of technology called the on-premise data gateway. So certain connectors in Logic apps that are designed to connect to on-premise systems have to use the on-premise data gateway. And the on-premise data gateway, I think we might have talked about that last week.
Yeah, we talked about it last week because it came out of Power BI, I think, didn't it?
It did indeed, yes, yes.
So because Power BI wanted the cloud resources to be able to access on-premise databases.
That's exact.
So
yeah, and it uses service bus relay to do that. So it's effectively a kind of like a reverse proxy. So you have a service running locally. Now, I don't have that service installed. I'm just about to go and install it with you guys. I'm going to share the way it's done. So I am going to attempt to do something here. I don't know if this is going to work, so apologies, Andrew. I'm going to stop sharing that screen, and I'm going to attempt to share the on-premise data gateway installer. Excellent. Can you see that?
Yay.
Excellent. So now this is the on-premise data gateway installer. So you can just download this from Azure, and we'll put a link up to the download location. So I'm going to accept most of the defaults. What this is going to do is it installs a service that runs locally. I'm on my dev machine, so I'm just installing it there. But if you were in an organization, you'd put it on you'd put it somewhere on a machine that can access whatever machines you want to in your network. So that could mean that you want to isolate it and you put it in like a DMZ or something like that. So as long as it can reach the machines, there's a lot of encryption involved with how it connects. you can open up, it connects outbound, so it connects using certain ports up to Azure, and you can create rules for those if you've locked down your outbound ports. There's no inbound traffic coming in directly at all, so you don't need to open up inbound ports in your firewall. So I'm just going to accept the terms. I'm going to click install. It keeps popping up UAC. It's going to go and install the service. And once it's installed the service, it will pop with a question that looks a little bit misleading, asking for my email address. It's actually my Azure portal login. So what will happen next is it will register the on-premise data gateway in Azure. So it will create a resource in Azure that links to this and has the same name, and then I can find that from inside Logic Apps. So we will wait for this to finish installing. Takes a little while, and I'm also going to leave all the defaults, so this is running as a local user as well. It's a network account. It's going to be running, creates its own account that it runs under. Alrighty, so can you still see the screen that's on at the moment? Yeah, installation.
No, we can just see you.
Oh, okay. Let's try this. Can you see that now?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay, so now it wants me to register. So email address to use of the gateway. This happens to be the login that you're going to use to register it in Azure. Now, what's really important here is when I register this in Azure, whatever login I use is the same login I need to use when I go up to Azure to create the corresponding gateway resource, the gateway in Azure, because otherwise it won't find it.
Yeah, so the same login that's in this that you're accessing that subscription in the Azure portal.
Yes, once you've created the resource in Azure, you don't have to use the same login. So I only mention this because this has tricked up people before. You've got one person installs it on-prem, registers it using their account. Somebody logs into the portal using their own account, can't find the gateway. It's just a one-time activity. So
it's just that one-off setup activity needs to be done by the same identity.
You'd think I'd know how to spell my own company's name, wouldn't you? Right, so we are now going to sign in. And we wait, and what it should do now is bring up the standard sign-in page. And can you see the sign-in page as well?
No, that's because you shared the specific window. It hasn't come up.
Yeah. Okay. No worries. All I'm doing. It's a standard login.
The standard authentication.
Yeah, exactly.
The standard Microsoft authentication.
Right. So cool. Now it's asking if I want to register a new gateway. Yep, or migrate, restore, or take over. So if I had an existing gateway that I wanted to put on, or I was adding an additional gateway to a cluster, you can create gateway clusters and things like that. But at the moment, I'm registering a new gateway, and I have to give it a name. Yeah, so I'm going to call that Logic Apps Live for now. All right, and I'm not adding it to an existing cluster. You can have multiple services running if you want to make it highly available or add DR or something like that. I'm going to create a key, and you just need this. If you say the VM or the machine it's running on goes down or is destroyed in some way, and you need to reinstall and get it going again, you just need to access the key, and then you can recover the gateway. So.
And everything on the cloud side will be unchanged.
Yeah.
You've just literally recovered the gateway onto maybe a different machine locally.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the one thing to bear in mind here, and I'm just pointing this out, that by default, it's going to use the subscription, the closest region that my subscription is in. So it's using North Europe. This is kind of important because this is where I need to go to try and find it. I could change that. You notice I created my Logic app in East US. I'm going to show you what happens. I'm going to leave this in North Europe. Yeah. So, and then I'm not going to click on this relay details. It's if I want to change the ports it's using and things like that. I'm just going to click configure, and it's going to go away. And what it's going to do is it's actually going to create encryption keys up in Azure. It's going to register and create an on-premise data gateway resource up there, and it's all done. And then I've got various things I can play with in here. I can come down to service settings and change the gateway account. I can restart it. I can look at diagnostics and logs, internal additional logging, and everything else. So HTTPS mode, if I want to use HTTPS rather than TCP, things like that. I'm not going to do any of that now. Right, I'm now going to come back to the portal here. Now, that gateway won't automatically appear. And the reason for that, I need to come out of this. I'm going to discard my changes to my Logic app. And I'm going to come back to my resource groups. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an on-premise data gateway resource. Yeah. So how do I do that? I come here and what I'm searching for is can't even spell, on-premises data gateway. There we go. Alrighty, so
this is almost like a so this is almost like a device twin kind of thing. You've actually got the on-premise device, and you've got the little component in the in Azure that is actually giving you access to that as an entity in the cloud, but actually it's doing all the relay behind the scenes.
That's exactly right. This is actually specific to Logic Apps. If I was using Power BI, I wouldn't need to do this step. Yeah, and it's a bit confusing because the resource I'm creating here is called an on-premises data gateway, okay, which is the same name as the software installed locally, but they're different things. What this is trying to do is this bridge, as you say, between Logic Apps and the installation, because I have to choose the installation here. Now, it says no instances found. That's because I'm in a different region. Remember, it said North Europe. This is really important. I have to change this to where it was created for it to find it, which was North Europe. And now, there's the installation. So what happened is when I installed it and then ran the configuration step, it's created a little stub resource up in Azure that says this is the installation name, this is the region it's in, and here are all the encryption keys. Okay, and that is, if I was just using OPDG with Power BI, that's all I'd need to do. Wouldn't need to do anything else. But because I want to use it with Logic Apps, I now have to create this sort of linking resource. So I'm going to give this a name, and I'll call it OPDG, I guess, OPDG, and we'll call it Logic Apps Live, and we'll home it in North Europe, and we'll make it dev. Now, here's a thing. Should I call that North Europe and do the full name, or shorten it? We'll do that. Alrighty. So we're going to go in the same resource group. Now, here's where I'm mixing things up. I'm putting it in the resource group that's homed in East US. This thing will be in North Europe. Okay. So we'll create this. And it's going to create this new connection resource. So you can see deployment in process. And in a moment, it'll pop up saying that that is all done. Great, that's all done. If I come back to my resource group here and look inside here, it hasn't yet appeared, but in a second, we'll see the new OPDG resource in there. Now, my Logic app I created is in East US. So what happens if I try and use that Logic app with a OPDG resource that's in a different location? Oh, I had this earlier. I was having a problem with the designer and discovering that it would lock up and I couldn't click on anything. I'll have to go to another tab and switch back, and then suddenly it works. So again, I haven't got an API connection, so it's going to ask for one. I'm just going to check to see what happens down here. There we go. It's found the connection gateway. So it has to be the same subscription.
So even though it doesn't even have to be in the same resource group. It doesn't have to be in the same region. It just has to be in the same subscription. So while you're filling out the rest of it, just remind everyone the kind of the hierarchy of things in Azure, because at the top level you've got a tenant, which is like your company is the tenant, and then within that is the subscriptions that are the you're almost separate. They're primarily used for account purposes or for billing purposes, and then within subscription you've got these resource groups. So that gives you the ability to to manage it, to manage your applications as granular level as you need. Right, did I buy enough time then to get that filled in?
Almost. I'm just going to come down now. I have to try and remember. If you give me 1 second, buy a little bit more time whilst I just find exactly where login
Okay,
details I
well,
have for my local
just
machine
spend a few
are.
minutes. I'll just juggle some fruit or something like that, and
Yeah, do you
keep
mind?
keep everyone entertained. No, it's yeah. I think one of these. Yeah, it's quite important to plan though how you want to do your subscriptions and regions from from a management perspective. So, for example, particularly between prod and dev, you probably separate your prod and dev subscriptions so that your prod is billed separately from your dev, because in a typical company there'll be different departmental budgets that they're going to. And then, like I say, within that, one of the things about a resource group is that you can tear down a resource group and everything within that gets torn down. So,
Exactly right.
again, especially for dev and test, if you want to spin up your application and test it, when you want to tear it down again, you can just tear down the resource group and everything gets flattened. So that kind of, that's a good way of grouping things together, so that you know that not only are they being managed together, but also, we often treat your resource group as a unit of deployment from a DevOps perspective. Hey.
Nice. Yeah, so we're here now. So can you still see my screen?
Yeah.
Yep. So I'm about to click create. This is just creating the API connection. So I had to go away and find it, but the username needs to be in domain format. So this is my computer name. I'll change it straight after this. My VM name, I should say. And then the user that I created for connecting to this machine, and then the password for that. And I go create, and it is going to go away and create it. One of the things you'll notice, the connection gateway there is named, that's the installation name, not the name of that on-premise data gateway resource I just created a minute ago. Even though if I didn't create that on-premise data gateway resource, I could not drop anything down. It's kind of interesting how it shows that. Right. So now we're in the actual trigger. So the step we did earlier was just creating a new API connection. So if I'd already had an API connection, I would have gone straight to this screen. And what it's saying is, what's the folder I want to select from? And were I to click in here, it's going to start showing me folders from the root folder I gave it, and the API connection.
Yeah.
But I know
so
the
it can't.
folder.
So from a security perspective, we can look down the tree from there, but we can't look at any further up. So that's.
Yes, exactly right. Yeah. Although, interestingly, you'll notice at the moment I specified ctemp as my root folder. I'm now giving it a folder that's outside of that. This will work. I don't have to be inside that folder. It's just that for the browsing point of view, I need to be inside it. Now, number of files. How many files should I be picking up at a go? One of the things, just to talk about briefly, is this concept of split on. So by default, this trigger uses something called split on, which means that if we collect 10 files, it has an array of 10 files, and it will split, and it will effectively run a separate logic apps instance per file. So if I pick up 10 files, there'll be 10 logic apps running automatically. It's a very cool feature. If I turn that off, I will get an array of 10 files, and I will then have to loop through those and process them. Yeah. So that's what this does.
Yeah. So in other words, the underlying behavior is to get a batch.
Yes. Exactly right. Yes.
It's then whether you get that batch as one batch, or whether it splits that batch for you and gives you an instance per item, which for most people is what they actually want.
Yeah, exactly right. So what's going to happen now is this is going. I'm set this to run every 30 seconds. I want it to run. I want it to pick up any files that are inside this folder and get up to 10 of them, and then we're done. So I should be able to click save. Excellent. Okay. So let's test it. Let's see what it does.
Yay!
Ooh, all right, so we'll come back out to here. And what you'll start to see is every 30 seconds, you'll start to see this stuff going up here. So you've got evaluated, which is how many times the trigger conditions are evaluated versus how many times it's run, how many times has it fired the trigger. And what you should see is this starts to go up. What we can do, though, is we can come into the trigger history and see what's going on here. So, oh, that's interesting. It failed. So why did it fail? So we can come down in here, bad request. We can go to the outputs link and we can see what happens. So, all right, it's basically saying that this path either doesn't exist or it couldn't access it. Yeah. Now, I happen to know that I created this folder a few moments ago and I didn't give test user access to this folder. Naughty me. So this is just a permissions thing. So what we can do now is we can come back out and I can say, actually, you know what I'm going to do is I am going to stop making that read only, and I am going to go to security. I know you can't see this at the moment, but I'm going to add that test user in, and I'm going to give them full control over that folder. This will take a little while to take effect. I might need to restart the OPDG service here.
Yeah, yes. So, but one of the things that we know from a security perspective, just having on that, is that if you haven't got access or the folder doesn't exist, you shouldn't give away any more information to potential attackers than you need to. So you should always try to keep that that information as you know, give away as little information as possible, because the fact that the folder exists but you can't access is actually useful. You know, is useful to an attacker. So we just get nothing back. It says, well, I don't know, may exist, may not.
That's exactly right. What I'm going to do here is I am going to just test something. So I need to just come back out here. We'll refresh here, and we've just got to wait for it to pick up what's going on. What I'm going to do in the meantime, while waiting for that to run, is I'm just going to show you what the browser actually looks like. If I was to change, if I come back out up to the resource group level, so I'm in the resource group here at the moment, and now we see the OPDG instance, we see the logic app, and now we've got the API connection. And if I come in here and I go edit the API connection, I can change that root folder. Yeah. So I can say, actually, I want to go to this folder here, save it. Now, here's the downside. I need to put all this information back in again because you know, for security reasons, it doesn't record it. So I need to put both these values back in and then save it. And I'll change my root folder to that. Cool, successfully edited that. Because one of the things I should have thought about is how do you make sure OPDG is going, and that file browser is a really good way of doing that. So if I come back in here and I go to this folder here and I go browse, let's see if it works. File system and loading. Aha, okay. Bang. So what that's effectively saying is it cannot find the root folder that I specified a moment ago. The user that we're logging in as doesn't have permission to that folder. That's what's going on here. So what we will do is we will come back out and we will give people access to that folder, or give that user access to the folder.
So one of the things just might be worth while you're doing that, because obviously you can multitask.
Yes.
Many people can't, especially me. But having to reset those connection properties in the trigger. I mean, if you were building another logic app and you wanted to access this, you wanted another file trigger, would you have to go through all that again? Or in exactly the same way of re-entering the credentials, or does that carry across?
No. Well, only if you want a different credentials. If you've got one OPDG instance and you're using the same credentials and the same root folder every time, then you can use the same API connection with as many different logic apps as you want. It all comes down to what you're doing.
Yeah. So once you've got that set up right the first time, then you can just reuse that. So so again, this is this stuff we're talking about now of getting this connection working, adding the security in the folders. You only have to do that once, and then after that, you're you know, it's happy days.
So that is still failing. Yep. So I am trying to remember. I think there's a lag between putting in the properties and making this work, but I'm going to continue on. I'm just going to pretend that works, although our demo isn't going to be very successful without this information. I'm trying to remember exactly what I need to do next. Let's assume that that's working. Now, we're using the properties only part of this at the moment, which means that we only get the metadata for the files we've received. So we don't get the actual file. So one of the things that is different, say, with BizTalk is with BizTalk, when we're picking up a file, we give a file mask. I don't know if you remember this in BizTalk. So I can specify in my temp folder, I only want to get star.csv, or employees star.csv or employees star.xml, something
Yeah.
like that. There's no equivalent here at all. We don't have the ability to do that.
So basically, you get everything that's appeared in that folder, but you only get the metadata. You don't get you just get a little packet of information that says, "Hey, I've got this file."
Yes, that's exactly right. Yes, we don't get everything that we want. I've just had a thought about something. I'm just going to go back. This is real live stuff here, and that is, I have the funny feeling that in here, this needs to be done like that. Just hit me. Oh, let me just put the user details back in again.
So can you just talk us through the subtle change you did to that folder, just so we...
Yes, I've escaped the paths here with so instead of going C/, I've done C // to escape that, just in case that's a reserved word. It's been a while since I've done this. I am doing this live. I haven't tested this beforehand, so I want to hit the same problems that other people might hit and solve them in the same way. But I'm now going to come back into the Logic app and I'm going to see if that made any difference at all. So it did not. Alrighty, so we're just doing all that. We're going to come back in and we're going to go Logic Apps Live or Love Inbound, because that's the folder I'm wanting to get things from. What I'm wanting to show here, though, is when I save this, notice that there's no problems. I can put whatever I want to in here. It doesn't check it until the trigger runs. Yeah. But if I come back into my code view, so now we're looking at a JSON representation of the Logic app. This is what we work with under the covers. And you'll see it's automatically escaped those //, which is needed because this is a JSON file. And there are certain characters in a JSON file that have to be escaped. And one of those is a /. So we've done that. And now we are what we're wanting to do once we picked up our file is ideally what we do is look at the metadata and decide, is it a file that we want to process? So we could add in a decision shape, and we can do that by going to, I think it's under control, we can look for, and we can choose a condition, which is effectively an if-else. There's also a switch, which works the same way as a switch in C#, but we can do a condition, which is what we're looking for. In this case here, we're going to be using the tags from this previous action. So in here, there are some information from the file system trigger. So we want to do the name, which is the name of the file. And what I want to do is I'm just going to check if it's ends with star.xml, for example. Okay, so if it ends with star.xml, then I'm going to come down this path here. And what I'm going to do in here is say, well, I want to go and get the contents of the file now. Because one of the actions we had in here is get file content. The reason it does this is you could have large files. This could be picking up a 5 or 10 meg file, yeah? And if you're not processing that file, you don't want to load it in. So now what we have to do is we have to go and get the file content. So we choose get file content, and it says what file do we want. We're using the ID of the file that we've been processing. So this automatically is using the ID of whatever file was picked up in here. Okay. Now infer content type means it will look at the extension and look at the content as well and decide what content type it is. Now this is really important because Logic Apps will automatically wrap content that can't be displayed in JSON. Because remember that the file content is being brought into the action, and everything in Logic Apps is JSON. So if I bring in an XML file, I cannot put XML inside a JSON file without encoding it in some way. So what it does is it will create a sort of an envelope around it with a content type property and a content property. And that content type will indicate that it's been base64 encoded. So we're inferring the content type, and now we have the file content. Okay, so now that we've got the file content, what are we going to do with it? Well, ideally, what we'd want to do is we'd say, well, I want to send it somewhere, or I want to just examine it, or maybe in our case, for our example, we were going to try and run an XML transform over it. So if I've got an XML file, I want to run a transform over it. So let's look at how we might do that. Because interestingly, I can test all this even though I can't connect to my file at the moment locally. I'm just going to save what I've got here. One of the things that I'm doing is I'm not naming these. Ideally, I should be naming these, okay? Get file content is a very generic name, but it's the equivalent of having a BizTalk application called BizTalk application 1. We should name all our actions. So I can name that here. I can rename this and I can say check if is XML file, or check file extension or something like that. One of the things you will realize is that I'm very limited in what I can do here. I can check if it ends in .xml or it contains a certain value, but I don't have support for file masks or anything like that. So the action I might do here would be, well, I want to run an XML transform. So I might go and look for that. So I might say, well, let's look for the transform action. Okay, now there's a lot in here. It's found a lot of different things that we can play with, and the XML is the one we're after. So inside here we have transform XML and XML validation. So transform XML we can click on, and it's going to ask us for what's the content we want to transform. In this case here, it's the output of this get file content. Okay, so the get file content's returned us something, so we're going to use that. And then what's the name of the map? Okay, there's no integration account associated. So here we go. This is a mistake we've made. We haven't yet created an integration account. So integration accounts are where you store schemas and maps. So if you're in a pure JSON world, if you're not doing any sort of migration from BizTalk or some other system that's using XML on premises or something like that, you probably wouldn't use an integration account, or if you're not using EDI, for example. But in our case, we want to use a transform, a BizTalk map, effectively, to do the transform here, and that has to be stored in an integration account. I probably can't save the logic app at the moment because it's got some invalid parameters, because this transform XML is missing the name of the map to use. What you could do, if you just want to get past this so that you can save the logic app, you can click enter custom value, yeah, and I could just type in, map. It should have let me type in the custom value at that point. I think get past this. So you use map as a custom value. There we go. So I'm only doing this because I'm wanting to save the logic app. Oh, that's still not letting me save it. Right, in which case what I'll do is I will delete the transform XML shape, I will save the logic app, and then we'll go away and create this integration account. So we come back out to our resource group. We're going to go add. We are going to search for an integration account. We're going to create it. And we are going to give it a name. So I might call that int account dash logic apps live slash dev. I'll keep it in the same location as the logic app. The pricing tier, free, basic, or standard. What this does is it controls how many schemas and maps you can create. So with the free one, I think you can create up to 50.
Is it 25? Is it 25
I think it's
or 50?
50 now for free. With basic, it's 500, and with standard, it's 1,000 maps and 1,000 schemas and the like. Yeah. So we'll create the free one.
And so obviously there is a charge associated with the integration account if you choose basic or standard. I can't remember off the top of my head what those charges are, but for large, if you're for example migrating a BizTalk application and you need to store your maps and schemas, you're going to have you're probably going to have an integration account, because you're probably likely to exceed what is in the free tier.
Exactly right. Yes. Now the free tier, you can only have one per region as well. That's another limitation. So great for testing with. So now it shows me all the things I can upload, and I want to upload a map actually and a schema. Now uploading a map, I can click on add, and you can choose your map. Now this is going to be slightly different to people that are familiar with BizTalk. What type of map is it? Liquid, which is a technology we talked about last week, I think, that came out of Shopify. and allows you to create a template for accessing things. It's what APIM uses, especially if you're doing SOAP to JSON or SOAP to REST. XSLT, which is XSLT1. Now, what's really important here is XSLT is the only one that supports BizTalk maps. So if I create a BizTalk map with custom functoids in it, and I want to use that here, I need to use the XSLT option here. XSLT 2 and 3 aren't supported in BizTalk, so they don't support the BizTalk maps. Although, as an aside, those of you that have used BizTalk 2020, you know that we now have XSLT3 support through Saxon, or a custom XSLT engine. Although my understanding is that I don't think they use Saxon under the covers here. And then HIDX is something that's used for mainframe, so it's part of Host Integration Server, Host Integration Data Exchange, I think it stands for. So you can create an XSLT for doing screen scraping and all that.
Yeah, but for our purposes, we're talking really just about, so if we were moving the BizTalk map, we'd use XSLT, but then it doesn't actually, it's not looking for our BTM file there, it's looking for the actual XSLT, isn't it?
Exactly right. Now that's really important as well. So if you were wanting to use an existing map you created, so in BizTalk you have a BTM file, and what this uses though is an XSLT file. So you need to convert your BTM to XSLT, and there are two ways of doing that. There are the integration account tools. So Microsoft have a series of tools that you install, and they're effectively using some BizTalk code, and they give you the flat file schema wizard and editor, and a schema editor, and a map editor. So it's exactly the same. It's the BizTalk versions of them, and you can use those for creating a map from your schemas and things like that. They haven't updated them though since BizTalk. I want to say BizTalk 2016, but I think it might be the version before. I can't remember. It's still running under Visual Studio 2015, which I think is BizTalk 2016.
Yeah. Anyway,
yeah.
We better crack on and build some.
Yes, I know.
Some logic apps though.
I could talk, and yet we've been talking for an hour already. Okay, so now I've got a map. I'm going to add that map. Okay. If you want to know how to get that map, an easy way of doing it is in your BizTalk project. When you compile it, go into the solution folder, and you will find that your BTM file now has a btm.cs file that's been in there as well in the output folder. And if you look in there, what you'll find is a C# file, and there's a constant, a string constant in there, which has got the actual XSLT of the map in there, and you can just copy that out and paste it into Notepad++ and save it as an XSLT file, and that works a treat. You don't need the BizTalk tools, the integration account tools for doing all this. So I've added a new map there, okay, which I did earlier. So now I've got that map, I can come back to my my logic app here. And the first thing I want to do in the logic app is I have to associate it with the integration account. So I come down to workflow settings, and it says select integration account, and there's the integration account I created. Yeah, and so I save that, and now it's associated with the integration account. So I can come back to the
things here. We can already see there's a lot of moving. There's a lot of moving pieces that when you're new to this, it's just a little bit fiddly, and
yes.
you're just trying to do all that. Once you've done a few of them, it seems, it becomes a bit more natural because you're expecting to do this. But it's just the way that these things work under the bonnet. You just need to tie a few different things together.
Yes, exactly right. So what I've got here is I now have the file content, and I now asking me to select a map, and now it will let me select the map I uploaded earlier. Okay. There's some additional properties of it, like transform options, and I can select that, and that will let me select things like changing the output to be text instead of XML, or applying the output attributes from the map and things like that. I'm not going to select any of those. Okay, so now I've transformed the XML, and that's done. Now, in the original version of this, when this was working, which I'm going to guess still isn't working. No, okay, I'm not going to be able to fix that. In the original version of this, what I was going to do is then add in the file system connector again, and I was going to create a file going out again. So I was going to select a folder. Again, this will fail because it's the same. It's using the same API connection here. But I will just, for demo purposes, go ctemp. Okay, now that's just a folder. Now the file name can be whatever I want. Now, one of the things you'll realize is that BizTalk's pretty good. It lets you, I think it defaults in the send port to percentage message underscore ID percentage dot XML. And those are macros. Now we don't have anything like that. So we can do something similar because we can use expressions. So I could come out to an expression and I could say I want to use the GUID expression. Okay, so I could use GUID. And what I could do is now combine that into, say, concat. So I'll say I want to concat two things together. Oh, that just disappeared very quickly. Where did that go? That's interesting. I obviously clicked out of that and that disappeared very quickly. I want to go concat, and then I want to go GUID, and then I want to go .xml. Why don't we try that? Yeah, okay. So what I'm doing here is I'm just calling it a new GUID.xml. That's the file name. Now file content, that's going to be the output of this transform XML, just like that. So in theory, I would save that, and that would be our logic app. Pick up a file, check if it starts with ends with .xml, transform it, and write it out the other end. Okay, I could do that quite easily. How would we test this? So one of the issues we're discovering at the moment is what happens if my file connector is not working, and I just wanted to test the transform on its own. I want to make sure that works. Now this is something you can't do easily in Logic Apps, you know. Sorry, in BizTalk. In BizTalk, I can write a test using a unit test framework to test the transform. I can do it from Visual Studio, but I don't have the ability to, in production, for example, test once I've deployed it, test just that part of, say, this pipeline, if you like. So the way
if you were properly troubleshooting, you just can't.
If you're properly troubleshooting, yeah, exactly right. So the way I usually suggest to people is that you break your logic app down into discrete parts. So your transform here could be a separate logic app. So picking up the file will be one logic app, transforming it's another logic app, and then writing it back out is a third logic app. There's no additional cost for doing this, really, because all we're doing is taking the same actions and splitting them across three logic apps. There's an additional trigger in each one, the HTTP trigger, so I guess there's a small consumption cost to that, but it's very, very small. But the benefit here is that I can then test the transform logic app on its own. And the way we would do that is we would come back out here and we would add a new logic app. Give me logic app. And we will call this, what should we call this? Logic. And that will be XML transform dev.
So what we're doing here is the equivalent of in again BizTalk forces you into certain patterns, but what we're doing here effectively is looking at that file trigger like an adapter, and then having another logic app that acts like the port. And the fact that we can separate those two things out means that we can separate out the testing of the port and the pipeline and the transform from just testing out the adapter.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to do with a simple HTTP request. So again, this is the bug I noticed in the design the other day. I have to switch away, switch back, and now I can access it again. So when an HTTP request is received, the URL is generated later, so we don't need to test that at the moment, but this is expecting JSON, okay? Now, what that means is that when we've got XML, we've got XML coming in through the file, but we want to send JSON. So what we need to do is we need to create a message structure that contains that JSON. And what that's going to look like is something like this. I would create a structure in JSON that looks something like this. Content type will be application/XML, comma, and this is actually what Logic Apps creates for you. It creates, if you give it content that can't be represented in JSON directly, it will automatically wrap this. So this content would be something that's base 64 encoded. Pretend that's base 64. I'm just giving it a sample JSON payload because what I'm wanting to do here is I'm wanting to generate the schema. Yeah. So this is the schema it's expecting, yeah, content type and content, and I'm expecting that to be base 64 encoded, yeah.
And that's really useful because most people don't really have JSON schema generation tools that they're used to, but what people do have usually is easy access to sample JSON messages.
That's exactly right. Now we know that content there is always base64 encoded. So when we pass it to the transform, the content here, we can use these tags. Now we've got a schema. I can select the content, but if I select the content like that, that's going to be incorrect because that's going to be base64 encoded. So what I want to do is I want to use one of the expressions down here. It'll be one of the conversion functions, which I might need to go see more to find it. Base64 to string. Okay, so I'm going to go base64 to string, and I need to give it back in dynamic content the content from here, trigger body content. Again, this is all using JPath or jQuery. And the name of the map we had earlier. Oh, there's no integration account associated with this logic app. Ah, no, I made the same mistake again. Right, let's delete that. I created a new logic app and I forgot to associate it with the integration account. Trick for new players.
So one of the things, so while you're sorting that out, because we've done that already, is just point out to everyone we're kind of at the hour mark now. So if you need to duck out, thanks very much. We will be sending the link out so that you can watch the playback, or the Teams. If you use the direct Teams link to access this, that will still have the playback available. So if you need to drop out at any point, don't worry. We'll send the playback out so you won't lose anything.
Alrighty. So now we have the transform XML happening, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to return it. I'm going to return whatever I got back out as a response. Now, I'm just going to assume we're using status code 200, and I'm going to show you something interesting. I'm just going to take whatever the output is for this, because what's kind of cool about what Logic Apps does is it will wrap that. If that is not something that can be necessarily represented in JSON, in certain situations, Logic Apps will wrap it for you and base64 encode it. I just want to see what happens with this shape. Now I've got a Logic App, and there we go. So how do we test this? Well, let's first of all see how we hook it up. So we'll come back out to our resource group here, and we'll go to our original Logic App, which is receiving the file, and we're going to replace where we're doing the transformation with a call out to our new Logic App. So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to add an action, and I'm going to search for Logic, and it should give me the Azure Logic Apps action, and that will give me a list of Logic Apps that have HTTP triggers. So Logic Apps I can call. So I can come in here and I can select the trigger, in this case here, which is the manual trigger, and it says, right, it knows, because I've already given it the schema, so it knows what values to pass in. Okay, it wants content and content type. So content is going to be the file content from here, and content type is going to be, in our case, is always going to be application/XML. This will break. I'm doing this purposely because if we were to test this for real, chances are what we're getting out of here is already the same format. In which case, what we want to do is not recreate this, but use the original value. I need to get the connector working properly to show this. Okay, so now I'm calling that Logic App, and I can remove this step here. Okay, so I'm doing a transform. But now I can test this Logic App on its own. I don't need to be testing it inside anything else. I can definition contains content. Oh, oops, create file. So that needs to be the output because I deleted that previous step. It needs to be the output of this Logic App. So it's going to be that there already. Cool. All right. So what I want to do now, though, is I want to test this Logic App on its own. So if I come in here and I go edit, to test this, I could try calling it from Postman, for example. I'm going to delete this Logic App afterwards, but this here is the URL to the Logic App. Now, you normally would never show this on a demo, on a recorded demo, because this is the signature for this Logic App. So anyone watching this could copy everything in here and call it. But I'm going to delete this later on, so it won't exist, so I'm not too worried. What I want to do, though, is I want to try testing this Logic App, and I normally do that from Postman. I don't think I'll open up the Postman window. All I have to do is a post into Postman, and it's going to ask for a body. So I'm I'm sending it JavaScript, and you remember that what we've said we're getting, we've already told it the schema is expecting. So it's expecting content and content type. Yeah. So I'm going to generate a JSON message that looks just like that. So it's going to have a content type, and that content type, I know you can't see this, but give me a second. I will. Let's go to the application/XML. And it needs some content, and that content needs to be base64 encoded. So how do we do that? Well, I can do that in Notepad++. Actually, I can open up an existing XML file, which I have already, and I can take that file, and there's a plugin in Notepad++ that can base64 encode files. So MIME tools, it's called. So I can base64 encode it. And paste that into my request, and then I can call my logic app. And I've just tried calling my logic app, and we'll come back here and we'll see what happened. And we got a logic app and it failed. We got a call, so we got a run, but it failed. Why did it fail?
It seems to, yeah, it seems to be a bit of a theme here, but this is the whole point: is that if you do this, straight out the box, you're gonna run into these things. Yeah.
Now I've just noticed that I made a schoolboy error, and I set the content type to JavaScript instead of JSON. So it's received an HTTP request. But because that request wasn't JSON, it didn't think it was JSON. It's base64 encoded the entire thing. Yeah. And then it's tried to call transform XML with it, with this, and that has just gone all wrong. Because what it's effectively done here is it's passed this JSON to the transform XML. It's not XML at all. That's wrong. So what I've done is I've gone back into Postman and I've changed the content type to JSON. Do you remember this? Every time I was saving my logic app or opening it, it would pop up a little warning saying, make sure your content type is set to application/JSON. That's really important because that's how logic apps works out what it's dealing with. So I've now changed that in Postman to be application/JSON. Okay. And if I come back to here and I refresh, I'm going to get another fail. But this now should actually have some interesting content.
Oh, so we've actually got.
Yep. So now we've got content type, yes, which is good. So transform XML invalid. Okay, it's saying base64 strings invoked, the parameter is not valid. It cannot be decoded from the base64 representation. Alrighty. So that is telling me that the base64 I gave it is incorrect, which is not helpful. Let's just see what I've done. I have gone base64 decode. That looks like it should have been correct. I'm going to base64 decode, but I suspect it needed padding. So that's exactly right. In Notepad++, when you do base64 encode, or when you do base64 encode, you have the choice of adding padding to the end or not. And generally, .NET and Microsoft like padding.
Is that just like the carriage return line feed?
Well, no, it's not. It's the equals you see at the end. It makes sure that I think it's to do with byte boundaries. It's making sure that you don't finish on a non-byte boundary. It's to do with boundaries anyway. In Postman. And I'm going to send that, and it's just taking longer. So let us I got some output.
Oh,
that worked. Look at that. So I got in here, transform XML. Aha, look at that. There's my content. Okay, there's the map. Yay. And there, in the raw output, we will see. Now here's something interesting. Body. This is Logic Apps doing it for us. This content type and content is not what I've created. This is Logic Apps doing it. So it has automatically base64 encoded the output of the transform shape because the XML cannot be represented, probably can't be represented in JSON.
Yeah, so it's just making the assumption that it can't.
Yes. So
because everything, because all the passing of parameters around Logic Apps just is done via JSON.
Exactly right. Yeah. So in this case here, the designer has decoded it for us. Yeah. So the designer is quite clever. It knows that if it gets this, that's it's something that needs to be decoded. So it will base64 decode whatever's in here and show you. So this is the decoded content here, and what we've got in here, you'll see that what we passed in was an employee, and what came back out at the other end is a Contoso employee at the other end. So that's correctly, the map has worked, which is great. So, and then it successfully sent the map out the other end. So there's the body we're sending out, and we've sent that with a 200. Now, interestingly, what I would normally do in terms of exception handling is if that had failed, I wouldn't want the logic app to fail. Because at the moment, this here, there's an implicit run after here. This here is set to run when this action here has succeeded, okay? Which means if this action fails, the logic app stops. So if you were testing that from Postman, what you end up with is an HTTP status code of 502. The gateway didn't respond, which is saying that we just, there's no data, something failed. But ideally what we would do is we would add in an alternative action here, and we would say, well, actually, I want to return an alternative response. I want to return, say, a 500, and I want to say, an error occurred, like that. And then I will change the run after for this and say, I want to run this when this transform XML has failed. Yeah. So I can do that. Now, and I might rename that to, error response, for example. Now, if I save that and I run it again with an invalid content, for example, let's try this. And then I go back and look at my run history. Okay. Although this has now failed, marked as failed, you'll see it's now actually come down to my error response, and it was returned 500 and error occurred. And in fact, in my Postman window, I can see that. So this is the start of how you do error handling inside your logic apps. Alrighty. I'm very aware that we're now at 3:10, and I haven't got this working. So what I'm going to suggest we do, Andrew, is that we stop here for today.
Yep.
And we get this going, and we record a little demo, sort of like a
little add-on.
A post-meeting, a post-webinar add-on.
So everyone that's attended gets a little bonus.
It gets a little bonus, yeah, showing this working. Because no one wants to sit here and see this working. I suspect, I seem to remember last time I did this, that I installed the OPDG, that what I had to do was reboot my machine for it to pick up permission changes. Yeah, it's still not picking them up at the moment. But that's what it's around. It's
just that fiddly permissions. So yeah, we don't need to. Fixing fiddly permissions doesn't need to be a spectator sport.
No, exactly right. But we will tell you what we did to fix it. There was a question that was put on earlier when somebody said, Mohammed, you were saying, what if we have different root folders? Do we have to create different OPDG instances? No, you don't. Most businesses I've worked with who use OPDG use network file shares, so what we call UNC file paths. So where you go / server name / share name. So the root file path is just used for relative paths. And also for the file picker. So if I'm wanting to say limit people, like in FTP, you could do this. I want to limit people to a particular folder, and then everything is relative inside there. I could use the root file path. But generally, you can choose whatever you want to for the root file path. If you're not using relative file paths with the file system connector, it doesn't matter what you choose. Just set it to C or C temp or something like that. Because then you'll end up with using file shares or UNC paths, point to a server / file share name, and then maybe some folders under that. That's how most people use OPDG with files.
That's I think the other thing to point out is that one of the things that Dan showed is that look at the logic app as a JSON file, because that JSON is your ARM template, and so in reality you tokenize that. So from the design time experience, you take that template and you tokenize it per environment. So whilst what we've done today looks like you're picking the file and that's important. In reality, as you stage that application through different environments, you'll be tokenizing it and putting those paths into your build scripts and deploying them.
Exactly right. Yeah.
It becomes less important.
Exactly right. The main thing is that the OPDG instance has access to those file shares. So whatever login details you've supplied in your API connection has access to that file share. And in fact, you can use you might have one OPDG being used for all your file shares across your organization. You don't need multiple installations of OPDG to do that. You might do that if you're having a cluster, so you want to make sure one goes down, that the others are there. Or you might do it for network reasons. You might say, well, I've got a data center in Europe and I've got a data center in the US, therefore I'll have an OPDG instance in the US and I'll have one in Europe, because then they're closer to the data. We're talking more about OPDG than the logic apps at the moment.
Yeah.
But if your the file connect or the file adapter in BizTalk is probably that and the FTP adapter are probably the two most used adapters in BizTalk. If I'm writing a file mover in BizTalk, which a lot of people do, I'm picking up a file, moving it to somewhere else. So it's a good example to show how we pick things up and use it. Righty.
Yeah. Okay, so should we wrap up then? Yes,
I think we'll stop there. We didn't get file pickup working. We did get XML transform working. Yay!
Yay!
And we showed also how we would break a logic app down to smaller pieces. So I'd have the transform part separate. What I really wanted to show, and what we'll get in this little addendum, is how this automatically base64 encodes your XML content for you, and what that means when you're trying to process it as well. We saw a little bit of that in terms of when we came back out of the XML transform and you looked in the run history, what you saw there is it already base64 encoded it.
Yep.
But there are certain cases where logic apps will automatically insert a base64 to string for you. So okay. Not a total success, but then that's what these sorts of live demos are about.
But it was a no, there was no tricks in that.
No.
It was absolutely live. So many thanks for that, Dan. So I mean, one of the things that seriously, one of the things you need to bear in mind is that what Dan's just done, what Dan's just done now, most people would take a lot longer over. So owing to his level of skill, whizzing through that and putting it together was actually really fast. Whereas actually, if you were doing this, particularly for the first time, there'd be a lot more head scratching and a lot more and a lot more time involved. So I just want to point out, we've been doing this webinar series. The next webinar is slightly different. This is a bit more, slightly less from the technical detail, but we're going to talk about Beyond BizTalk and the future for on-premises integration, based on some of the announcements that have come out of Microsoft lately, that they're really shaping up for the future in terms of what happens on premises, what happens in the cloud, and what the integration story is. So we're going to look at that in a couple of weeks. It'll be much more slidey and less diving into the portal, but probably everyone needs a rest by now. So and in the meantime, we will get that. We will get the rest of that demo done, and we'll send a message out to everyone with a recording of this demo and the tacked on final bit of this one, and that will be, and I think that will be a great way to wrap up a fantastic demo. So Dan, thanks a lot for your immense efforts and your and your expertise in this area. It's been fantastic having this having you on this webinar, and so it's goodbye from me, and that's why you say it's goodbye from him.
It's goodbye from him.
Goodbye. Okay, thanks.
I just want to say, Andrew, do you know what? I've just fixed the problem with the file adapter, the file connector.
Hey, what was it?
We will add that on a separate video. I suddenly had a thought about what it was. All right, brilliant. Thank you so much.
Okay, that's brilliant. All right, thanks everyone. Thanks for watching, and we will catch you soon. All right, bye now.